Okay, so let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. And I had sent out the minutes for the previous meeting, so I will read those since you don't have copies, and then we'll make any changes or corrections to this copy. Let's see. May 22, 2015 meeting. 2 committee members, Pete Olson and Brad Wick, attended by iPhone as they were not able to be in Picken for this meeting. Lisa Stonquist served as secretary until around 5 p.m. when she needed to leave and Susie Metzler took over the job. The You there? Brad? Brad?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm setting you on the table. Just relax. Okay, the Picken Short-Term Rental Committee meeting was called to order at 4 p.m. on Friday, May 22nd, 2015, in the Newcomb Community Center. This was a public meeting and several interested citizens attended. The first meeting held on May 19th was an open, freely run meeting as there was no agenda in advance of that meeting. Chairperson John Weiss stated that this meeting and agenda will be followed. Secretary Lisa Stonquist read the minutes of the meeting held on May 19th. Gwen Matase moved that the committee accept the minutes as read, and the motion carried. Chairperson John Weiss stated that the committee has a position to weigh in on that they may decide upon what areas of interest to address. Okay, the things they need to address are the points of concern or points of interest, coming up with a list of bullet-pointed issues. This is the goal of the meeting. Each committee member was asked to bring their list of concerns to the meeting. Joe Grindelwald said that once they determine the categories which are of highest priority, it will all fit together. Corey Nasso stated that there had been 6 letters received so far by email to the committee's email address. The deadline for turning in comments is May 28th. Pete Olson by iPhone suggested that soon after the deadline for comments from the public, the committee should meet again with the meeting dedicated to discussing the key points of those emails. John Weiss said that once the emails are all read, establishing points of concern, then methods, which may vary, of dealing with those concerns can be worked upon. Corey Nasso stated that if the septic system requirements are too difficult, people will rent out properties on a short-term basis anyway under the radar.
John, I'd say it wasn't specifically about septic, it was more in general, just if regulations, guidelines are too strict.
Okay.
Too strict or too voluminous?
Just too many and too large?
Yeah.
Extensive.
Yeah, extensive would be a good word.
Okay. John Weiss said he would like the committee to always refer to the short-term rentals as short-term rentals and not VRBOs. Brad Wick by iPhone said that the Zoning Board of Adjustments will need to meet after this committee completes its task, and that the hope is that the short-term rental committee suggestions can be presented and voted on at the July 2015 town meeting. John Weiss said the committee needs to develop category headers like permit, safety criteria, and guest orientation. Patrice Boyd from the public said that the fire alarm should be checked and there should be an application process that includes all of these safety concerns. Corey Nasso agreed. Joe Grindelwald said that there are expectations for property rental on a long-term basis, that the requirements for short-term rental should be as good or more stringent. Dennis Spritzer, Gunnison County Fire Marshal, told John Wise that he will be happy to come up and assist with fire inspections when we get to that point. Occupancy of various properties will be determined by both. Now this I believe is incorrect, so you guys correct me here. Occupancy of various properties will be determined by both the size of the septic system and by the fire marshal, who will need to look at egress issues and will determine how many people can safely escape from the home in the case of a fire. And this is presented as though that this is fact when it is nothing more than I suggested we recommend to the town board. So does everybody agree with that? I'm just going to put a note out here. Okay. John suggested that the town may want to have engineer Bob Williams on retainer so that he can look at any short-term rental homes to make sure their septic systems are in good working condition, and he can determine how many people should be allowed to occupy the homes on a regular basis. A decision needs to be made whether all of the inspections and determinations should be done by Bob Williams, or if it is permissible for owners to get their own engineer to come make these determinations. Precautions need to be taken for public safety. Septic systems are designed for the number of people who will be inhabiting the home. Category header. Well, Pete Olson by iPhone said that we need to compile a list of general topics and guidelines by bullet point. The whole committee chipped in and discussed the following topics, which I believe is the condition of the board right now. Number 1, application and permit. Number 2, septic. Which that was determined to be administrative at a later point. Verify compliance on taxes, concerns, 2, of fairness to other area existing lodging facilities, occupancy, number of people allowed to stay in the house according to septic engineer and or fire marshal, review process, annual review, not reviewed midstream, surrounding neighbors, consent or disapproval of having a short-term rental near them, particularly if any residential short-term rentals are approved conditionally. I don't know that I exactly recall that.
John, I was gonna say, can we amend the minutes to really represent what's on the board?
I think that
There's-
if you'd be
well-
patient, let me get there. We'll
Okay.
get there.
I just wanted to make sure
I
it's.
don't know, why is this what's there? Is this what Brad said? And then, this is not the same as what's on the board?
I think this is what we were talking about verbally before we began on the board.
Okay.
Yeah, that's representation of the discussion that preceded.
Yeah.
Right.
The list,
Okay.
the
And
list
see,
in the minutes.
let me get to another page and we get to the board.
Bingo.
Okay. Let's see, related criteria recording short-term rentals in business versus residential zoning, possible amendments to zoning code, more discussion and initial application time. The committee discussed that the property owner needs to have a sales tax license that they can provide, and if they have been renting on a short-term basis in the past, they need to show that they have turned in the required state 2.9, county 3%, local pick and sales tax of 3%, as well as the 4% Gunnison County sales use and lodging tax. Also, at the time of application, property owner needs to have a fire and safety inspection as well as septic inspection done by a qualified engineer. John Wise suggested during the annual renew process, the property owner needs to show that the appropriate taxes were collected. Joe Greenwald said that some of these issues could all be covered under one heading, administration. This would encompass application, renewal, sales tax verification, occupancy limits in the septic, safety and fire inspections of the property involved. Pete Olson said that the preliminary part of the application should be the fire, safety, and septic inspection reports submitted with the initial application. Rand Mikowski suggested that the application fee should be collected at the beginning of the process. Joe stated that the letters of consent for neighbors should also be included with the initial application. It was discussed that guest orientation would include information such as how to operate the heating system, or in particular wood-burning appliances, if any, as well as instruct the guests not to put certain items down the septic system. Brad Wick by phone said that there needs to be discussion of water quality, having the well tested in advance of turning in the application, and that the town's nuisance ordinance will need to be revisited. Susie Metzler took over taking notes for Lisa. Joe Grunewald asked if there were whiteboard markers, and Candy went and got some. So this is what we ended up with on the board. Administration, under that, permit application, parking, licenses, inspections, occupancy, and neighborhood residents' input. Number 2, safety, fire inspection. Number 3, property postings. Number 4, complaint process. Number 5, enforcement. And number 6, short-term rentals allowed in Pitkin. There was a question as to whether the town's camping ordinance would extend to tenants in short-term rentals. Should renters be allowed to have tents and RVs on the rental property? Brad Wick by iPhone said that off-street parking needs to be reiterated. John Wise said that it should definitely be made part of the application process. Brad Wick also said that the committee members need to review the town's camping ordinance. There was discussion on how the committee should determine how many short-term rental homes should be allowed in Pitkin. Gwen Matisse said that she feels it should be the number one concern. Joe Grunewald moved that the committee accept the list that was on the whiteboard in its entirety. Corey Nasso seconded. The vote was unanimous. John Weiss said that he reserves the right for the committee to make modifications as needed. Signage was discussed, and Corey Nasso said this is covered under the zoning code. Susie Metzler commented she did not think that camping should be allowed at short-term rentals. Stephanie Nasso said that she thought that camping should be allowed. Kathy Rose said that there should be a discussion about curfew and noise. Gwen Matisse moved that the meeting be adjourned. First, the committee agreed on the next meeting dates, May 29, 2015, 7:15, or 7 o'clock at Newcomb. The meeting adjourned at 5:35.
I have a correction.
Excuse me.
I did not say that it should be allowed.
Pardon?
I didn't say that it should be allowed. I just said, why does it matter if they're residents or non-residents?
Okay. Okay, now say it again, because it says here that you stated that you thought camping should be allowed.
I don't. I just think, I said that it, if you
Should be
can,
considered, or-
I can correct that. What she said was, you know, if a homeowner has his guests over and they have a tent and they put it out in the backyard for the kids, why not deny that same
what does it matter if you
thing
know
to
them or not?
the
Okay.
renter?
I think it's cool. All right, so I will change this, that's not exactly what you said. So other than Stephanie's comment and this other item, do you folks have any other things that you feel need to be corrected or amended?
Nope.
I move we accept the minutes as corrected.
Second.
Okay, so there was a motion made by Gwen and seconded by Pete Olson to accept the minutes as they were amended. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carried. Okay, so now, well, the way that we're going to do this is that at the beginning of the meeting, after we review the minutes, we're going to have public comment.
We want
And
to approve the agenda.
We have to review the agenda.
Well, I think just as anybody on the committee, do you have that on your,
well, wait just a moment.
Oh.
Okay,
review
I'm
and
sorry, I
approve
apologize.
agenda. You got it on there.
I was looking at last week's instead of this week's. Okay, so this is, does anybody have any comments as to the agenda for tonight?
I move we approve it.
I second.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor by Pete, seconded by Gwen, that we approve the agenda as presented. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the protocol of our meetings. We want to be thorough, we want to be fair, but we also don't want to take all summer. So I think that we should consider attempting to try to get everything sufficiently put in place so that we can present it to the July meeting, to the town board. And it's my understanding that we present to the town board, they hand off to zoning, then zoning hands back off to the town board. So hopefully we can have this prepared and ready to go at the July meeting.
When's the July meeting?
The July meeting is going to be, I wrote that down. I think it's the second. No, it's the second Tuesday.
Or around the 9th or 10th, isn't it?
Of July?
Second Tuesday is the 14th.
Yeah.
So you have to present this to, or the zoning board would present this to town council by then?
Well, I think
Sure,
that's-
that we do our handoff.
That's kind of unclear what we're supposed to,
Well, but I think that what the point of this part on the agenda is actually to determine we know what our goals are as we set forth in the first meeting. But is there any modifications that, anybody have any comment about that, or any comment about the procedure that you believe will help us do a better job quicker?
Okay, now, just to be clear, our procedure right now is what?
Okay, it is what I believe that we were tasked with, and if any of you have different
No,
recollections.
I was talking about the timing, I'm sorry.
What's the meeting schedule, et cetera? Is that?
That's what
Well,
I
the
was
meeting
talking-
schedule is, I know that a lot of people who are here are retired. I'm not. Wick isn't. And, you know, I've got certain activities that I have to do. So it's not going to be something that where we can bang out. We got to have at least 48 hours for to post the notice. So we can't do it any quicker than that. But by the same token, I think that we need to run with this Monday. And we're going to run again on this coming Monday. We'll go again on the following Monday and see how far we can gain before we start doing massive sections.
So we
Because I,
sit
for
down
one,
and write.
it was suggested that we do this on Sundays, like 3 or 4 hours. And with Sundays is my one day that I spend with my wife and go to town, and I'm not going to give that up, not easily anyway.
John, I've got a
Yes,
a
sir.
point of order here. Are we talking now about the mission and timeline of the committee?
Yes, sir, we are.
Well,
Yeah, we kind of skipped over.
did you want to talk about items 4 and 5 first?
Wait a minute. The meeting outline. Okay, I am very sorry. I'm very sorry.
I mean, can I make a motion
Yeah,
the
please
chairman
do.
follow the agenda?
Should I second it for you?
Sorry.
Okay, well, back to you guys. When we have a time for you to speak, please speak then. That's when you'll be recognized. If you have an idea, something comes up, that, write a note so that you're ready when the appropriate time comes, because we're not going to just randomly take public comments and, just hold them till the appropriate time. And also, part of what we're going to do tonight is to go over the letters. We got some 44 emails plus one hand delivered, and see how they fit into what we already have. To see if there's, and the vast majority of them are things that we have already talked about when you're talking about the bullet point. The detail differs immensely, lots. So, and also, the task of this committee is to propose regulations of short-term rentals. So we weren't tasked with doing a survey, or we weren't tasked with keeping track of who's on first, okay? So that won't be allowed. It doesn't need to be part of this meeting. The bullet points is the only thing we need to talk about. Okay, now I will yield the floor.
Well, no, I think that's fine, but now do you want to have public comment?
Yeah, but I have been talking an awful lot.
Well-
I would like to have a couple of comments.
Well, I think as you're explaining the public comment, but then we're going to review the comments in relationship, kind of like on the agenda. And then after we do that, then we'll have kind of a work session and
Yes.
talk about revising and whatever, go forward
Yes.
from there.
Okay.
That's
Do
fine.
any of you gentlemen have anything to say?
Nope.
No?
Nope.
Okay, this would be a time that we would recognize folks for public comment. Yes, Eddie?
Couple things. One, have you guys received the CAST survey that was mentioned several months ago?
I don't even believe that the CAST survey has been completed.
I looked on the website today and it's not listed, not shown as available.
Okay, so it's not done yet?
It's not done.
Okay. Has anybody talked to him to see when it might be? Because I believe when David talked about it before, he thought it was gonna be like a 6-week.
Well, yeah, I think that what happened was that at the last month's council meeting, the council was presented with a couple of requests. And I can't speak for the council, but the impression I got was they didn't think they should make any decisions until they had some guidelines and they were aware the CAST study hadn't been completed. So they appointed this committee to proceed, so.
I'm sorry, excuse me, what are you talking about?
Well, there's
I don't
Colorado Association of Ski Towns,
understand.
CAST.
Okay.
And they have, for whatever reason, I just looked on the website this afternoon, and it's not listed.
And so they're in the process of doing a survey about short-term rentals, right?
Right.
Okay.
Well, I think that's a matter I would suggest you take up with town council. I mean, it was talked about earlier this winter. Why don't we wait and see what they say? Well, we jump-started the deal. That's what the town council asked us to do, so that's what we're doing.
Okay. So as far as this committee is concerned, you guys aren't reviewing or looking at? or
There's
Well, I-
concerned
nothing
with
to
the
review.
cast-
I don't know, I can't speak for the others, but I've certainly been researching what's been going on in the state of Colorado and around the country. So, I mean, I don't think that the CAS study is gonna come up much different than what we've found.
Okay.
So,
So when you say we, you mean the whole committee?
well, I think the CAS study is gonna identify what different communities have done, and they've all done something similar to what's up here in different shapes and forms. And I think that CAS study is just gonna review what they are. I don't think they're gonna come up with any, set in concrete guidelines or.
There's another resource document that we've all seen from the National Association of Realtors, I think, which is a very thorough and comprehensive document of what different communities are doing throughout the country on this very issue. So that's a valuable resource.
And that's something the whole committee has reviewed, or?
It's been provided, and then there's also an STR, short-term rental advocacy website that has a lot of information. It's an organization that, promotes the proliferation of short-term rentals, but it has a lot of information. So, I mean, there's a lot of information out there that's just as available to us as it is to the Colorado ski town.
I guess that's just what I'm asking is what all has the committee seen and reviewed and
Well, I've looked at a number of town ordinances from mountain towns in Colorado. I've looked at the state statutes, so, I've looked at the National Association of Realtors study, short-term advocacy, that's what I've looked at, so.
And would you say what we've seen so far is pretty much in line with what the majority of what you saw was, or not?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what I've found is, first and foremost, as everybody's aware, this is not just a hot button issue in Pitkin.
No,
It's all around the country.
right.
North Carolina, Florida, Colorado, Aspen, Montezuma, Colorado. I mean, it's just down the line. It's a growing phenomenon. It appears, from what I've read, that the vacationing public is beginning to have more and more of a preference for a short-term rental as opposed to motels and hotels and condominiums or whatever. So that lends to me the idea that if we're going to do this, we ought to do it right. So I think that's what I've found in the literature. Then as far as the regulations, depending on which way the committee would decide to go on this, in my mind, there's two different ways to do it. One is by an administrative regulation through a separate ordinance, or through zoning, but that's something we'll be talking about later. But regardless, each of the communities, the regulations that I've read, and I've looked at Silverton, Grand Lake, just go down the list. I mean, they've all got regulations. Some of them have changed in the time I've first looked at them. But, each community, by state law, has the ability, through the police power of zoning and regulation and all that, to set up guidelines that they see fit. And they're doing that. I've seen regulations that range from, like a specific number of short-term rentals allowed, percentages. I've seen where there's a requirement that a property owner in a community can only have one other property that's a short-term rental. So in other words, that would, I think, would be something to
Right.
consider, because that would prevent,
Somebody buying
megabucks
a
coming
bunch
in
of
here and buying
properties.
everything up and all that.
Right.
Now, one thing that's been talked about, and do you want me to keep going?
Well, let me just say, has he satisfied your question or got
Well,
to the root of what you were wanting to hear?
It sounds like Pete's really done a lot of research, and I appreciate that very much. And I guess that's kind of what I was asking is, the board seems to have, all of the board's been provided, I guess, with the Realtor
Yeah, National
deal?
Association.
Okay. And I guess I'm just asking the board is, have you guys all reviewed it?
Yes.
Everybody
Yes.
has? Great.
I don't know that
And
I agree with
appreciate
it.
it.
We were
I approve of
appointed
that.
by the town to make our decisions because we're responsible individuals who are going to consider everything.
And I appreciate that. And
Well,
I have to-
thank you.
And I have to say, I appreciate John's comment about, you know what, Sundays are his day to spend time with his wife. I think that's something is admirable. One other thing, and I guess I'm not sure where the whole camping thing is right now, if this is even part of this discussion or not, or?
It's not.
It's not,
Okay.
and it could potentially be, but not in this phase of where we're at right now. What,
I
where
mean,
we're at,
I just have a problem in the town telling me that I can't have my grandkids in a tent outside my house.
yeah, I would have that same problem, so,
Okay,
but
great.
we're not there yet.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thomas?
I just wanted to ask if short-term rentals in commercial as well as residential are all being considered together. There's no differentiation between the two as per zoning?
Right now, this is my understanding, if you guys want to try to trump me, go ahead, but it is currently not legal by zoning. So what we are going to do is we are going to make recommendations for regulations set upon short-term rentals in commercial property and footnote them so that they would be applicable to short-term rentals in residential if the town goes that direction.
Okay.
Okay, so we're addressing both, but we're going to footnote because there is some differences between the two.
I might,
Yes, sir.
again, just to clarify, I don't know, some people maybe weren't here this past winter, but the town spent a great deal of time talking about this issue. The town attorney did state that it was his interpretation of the zoning as written that short-term rentals are not permitted in the residential district. He said could be clarified. So with that suggestion from the town attorney, the Board of Zoning Adjustment met, had a hearing, received some input, and developed some proposed amendments to the zoning code that clarified what the attorneys interpret the regulation to read. They added some definitions for short-term and long-term rental. They clarified but with those definitions, what was and was not permitted in residential and what was and was not permitted in the business district. And
But those
my
have to be
understanding in
amended,
ordinance
right?
to adopt those recommendations of the zoning board of adjustment is on the agenda for the next town meeting. So I think what John's suggesting, and I think I agree with him, is that I don't think that this board was supposed to fight that battle of whether or not they're going to be allowed in the residential district. I think we were charged with the responsibility to come up with recommended guidelines for short-term rentals. As we understand it right now, it's in the business district only. I think, but just to be fair, that in the event that the town might change that, there may be some additional guidelines we feel that might be appropriate if they were to occur in a residential district. So I think what John's saying, let's come up with a list of what we think are the basic guidelines for short-term rentals, and then if they were going to be allowed in the residential, do we think there are some additional criteria that ought to be met? That's how I see it. So, and I think that could be possible.
Okay, yes.
Bob Pope at
Yes.
329 Main. So are you're talking about developing this for short-term rentals even in commercial properties? So as the Pitkin Hotel owner, are we talking about going through a permit application
I do
for
not
existing
believe that
commercial
this is-
property?
I do not believe that this is applicable to, I mean, your business is a business. You're
Right.
not treating your home as a business.
Right,
And I think that's the difference.
okay.
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna affect, it's my understanding this is not to affect brick and mortar.
Yeah, I think that the zoning board's recommended definition of a short-term rental is a short-term rental of a residential structure. It wouldn't apply to commercial lodging.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I was a little confused because I already thought that short-term rentals were approved in commercial areas.
They are, but the town has asked for a set of guidelines to maybe elaborate on what criteria should be met. That's,
Yeah, it was a
And
part of their
also-
application and renewal process.
And also about the revisions in the zoning code in reference to defining short-term rentals in residential, which is going to be voted on in June. Are those revisions available for the public to see prior to the June hearing? The proposed revisions, the changes to the zoning code?
well, I don't know, I think that the town published a notice of the amendment, probably by contacting the town clerk, you might be able to get a copy of it.
That's not something
I
that we
really
would
wasn't
be
aware that-
responsible to hand out.
Yeah, it was the town clerk.
Well, I mean, that's an academic problem, but maybe
Okay.
talk to the mayor, but
Well, can we move on? Does anybody have any other points? We will, I mean, that is, if we had it, we would share it with you, but we don't have it. So, but there's not anything we can do about that at this time. Anything, anybody else? Okay.
I just have a question. I didn't get your name, sir. I don't know your name.
Thomas Kelly.
Oh, okay.
So do you want to get back to the
Yeah.
discussion of the mission and timeline?
Yes, I do.
Okay, well, if I,
Yeah, go ahead.
I made the
You
statement
gentlemen,
earlier.
any of you folks
Yeah.
can,
And I don't want to repeat myself, but I do believe that because of the zoning situation, that we ought to come up with guidelines to be applied to short-term rentals as they're currently permitted. And then, in the eventuality they might become permitted in a residential district, determine are there any other additional criteria? Because I don't think that we can really say that we're making recommendations
I don't want to
for.
interrupt you, but on our first meeting, we had set a goal, which was to agree upon policies and procedures that benefit the community in regards to short-term rentals in both residential and commercial properties.
Okay, was that voted on by the committee? I mean, I think that's what
We
we're
can look
talking
at the
about.
minutes, but, I mean, we can
Okay,
go back
well-
and look at minutes, but what I'm getting is, I mean, unless we're wanting to change our goal in our third meeting, but that's what we had discussed on our first
You
meeting.
know, I really think it's a matter of semantics or something. John is saying we don't allow it at all now, so we can't do regulations for it until the town makes the changes. And so we are really setting it up for a consideration in residential areas, but he doesn't want to make it, we're doing regulations for something that's legal. We're doing regulations for something that's illegal. So I think I don't think
Yeah.
there's
There's
I do
not
not
that big
think
a
we need
difference.
to argue about this
Yeah.
type of thing.
and it is simply, if there is a difference that we determine as a committee, then it would just simply be footnoted as part of the deal.
Addendum
Yeah,
to
that's
the
fine. I mean, I
You know,
think
at such time that the town board would change so that it is permitted under current zoning,
So
then
he's talking
it's already
about
there.
Making recommendations. just not
So are you? you got
Well,
any
yeah,
further
that's
comment?
fine. I mean, I think as we have our discussion, I think that, in my opinion, there may be some criteria that might be included if they're going to ever be permitted in residential. that We might not require in a business district, that's all I'm saying, so.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
All right, do any of the other folks have any comment with regard to our mission and timeline?
Well, length,
Of meetings or length of?
no, length of time.
Well, John said earlier that we're going to have a goal of trying to get this done in time for the July council meeting, all right?
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
you know, one thing I think that might be helpful, since we're going to be meeting through the rest of this month and the town council in the meantime has a meeting, it might not hurt, since they never really gave this committee a direct mission statement or direction, to go tell them what you're doing and see if there's something they want to be done differently, just in case we need to change course, because,
I think that would be good for you guys.
So that's on the 9th, that's the second Tuesday again?
Second Tuesday.
yeah, it'd be
The 9th of June, yeah.
a week
okay.
from coming to, yeah, like.
Second Tuesday. they're
So,
always
you know, we're gonna
the
meet a couple times between now and then. I'm just suggesting that maybe the
I
chairman
bet
go,
the chairman.
go and say, hey, here's what we're doing. We never really got a clear, you know, because
Here's
I
an
watched the
update.
video of the night they appointed the committee, and the attorney attempted to discuss, he had some points that he thought were pertinent,
Yeah.
and that kind of got shuffled aside because there was a big debate about membership, and then they selected the
Did you get
subject.
a copy of those points?
Okay, well, let's move on. And at this point, we're going to go into a work session. Like I say, from out there, if you have something that you want to say, then please make a note so that you can say it at the next appropriate time. I believe everybody read all of your letters. I have them in chronological order, the way they came into my email server. And one thing that I noticed, and I'm sure that you did as well, that for the people who were in opposition, they didn't give any guidelines. They just said, I don't like it. And the people who were in favor of it did give some guidelines. There was an awful lot of resumes, you know, on how I earned my stripes in Pitkin. And so those, we're going to skip right past the detail. We're going to skip right past the resumes and just talk about the bullet points as they apply to our board to determine whether or not we add or modify the board. So the first letter was in opposition, so there was no suggestion. The second letter, which I'm just going to go
John,
through.
I just want to make a point real quick, and I don't want to interrupt, but just because they were in opposition doesn't mean that, I know they didn't present
Well-
anything, which was kind of what we had asked, but they did present some concerns, which I think will
Well,
be
if
addressed
they
and
were
can be
concerns,
addressed.
I will address them. If,
Okay,
actually,
that's
what
fine.
I'm going to address is what can go on that board right there.
Okay.
Okay? So, unless, did you print yours off? Do you have yours? Okay, so do you have them in chronological order as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this one suggested that the number of VRBOs be limited, which is a cap, which that was quite consistent throughout a lot of them, was that it's okay to establish a cap of some sort. And do we have a cap up there?
No.
That need
Well,
to-
that's-
We didn't talk about
That's
it.
number 6, number of short, how do you determine it?
Okay, that we'll have to get to. But I mean,
Just make sure we didn't
Yeah.
miss a bullet.
That's right,
Yeah.
that's in that category.
Okay. The other thing is, a lot of the people suggested that there needs to be some sort of an acceptance or denial note from a neighbor, an adjacent property. There was a lot of people who suggested that that be part of the process.
We've got that up there.
Okay. All business and resident, here's a comment like what Corey was talking about. All businesses and residential should be held to the same standards as the standards that are going to be set for short-term rentals. Okay, here's the next one. Cap on the number of short-term rentals. Post pertinent ordinances and contact information, which I believe,
Yeah.
let's see, install water monitor to monitor septic. No, this was the one and only place I saw anything such as that. Does that require any consideration to actually monitor the amount of water going through the
Well,
system?
that's the first suggestion that I heard, that actually is a physical metric
Yeah.
that you can see on
Use
a
for-
on a
Yeah,
periodic
so-
basis.
Otherwise,
I don't
it's
think we ought to
guesswork.
set it aside. I mean, I think
Okay.
it may be
Well,
considered.
let's,
It's truly a metric that hadn't been presented earlier.
okay.
I'm sorry, was that water use?
It's a
Like
Yeah,
measuring
to
how much?
actually monitor.
gallons per day, gallons per month, whatever.
Okay. So we can footnote that and talk about that in another place. Let's see, require permitting, which we talked about, applicable lodging taxes, which we talked about, smoke detectors, O2 monitors, septic inspections up to date. A lot of this is going to be repetitive, but I think the only way to be proper is to just buzz through these and touch the high points so that everybody knows that yours was actually looked at and read. Okay, property owner manager should provide contact information. Complaint process should be made publicly available. Limit the number, put a cap again on the number of places, based on a percentage in this person's case. Let's see, qualified licensed engineer should inspect the septic, so we've got that one covered. Adequate parking, we've got that one covered.
John,
Yeah,
maybe you haven't got to it yet. I'll be quiet. I'll bring it away. Sorry.
letters from adjacent property owners. Okay, here was one suggestion that there actually be a fee charged, so many dollars per night. Which that's between the town and how they're renting.
Licensing and those kind of things, yep.
Okay, septic inspection, adequate insurance. This was the one and only comment that I saw regarding insurance. Trash containment. Which I would
Yeah, I think-
imagine,
I think both of those are issues that probably we ought to be sure get addressed in our discussion. Just because I think
John, the only thing on the trash, and I don't know, I'm just bringing it up for consideration. I think it's actually covered under a nuisance ordinance.
okay, well,
But
let's address that just a minute.
Yeah, we can revisit it and see if it is indeed covered.
I
specifically in
think
the
that
nuisance ordinance.
being as the zoning laws were written, before short-term rental was even a twinkle in anybody's eye, that any zoning ordinance or ordinance that we think is pertinent, we should make the recommendation back to the zoning board that you revisit this and look at it through the eyes of a town who is now.
Well, and I think I'm making a note, I mean, we can talk about this later.
Okay. But trash and insurance, I don't know myself how any type of liability insurance would apply to this, but it is probably something that we should look at. A lot of resumes. Let's see, one person suggested, which Pete, I think, touched on this, is it going to be, are we going to look at it as an administrative process or as a zoning process? And, I guess one would require the need of a public hearing or one wouldn't. But that was a concern of one person. Let's see, here's another one. Either the homeowner is local or has an agent or a representative that is local that can be contacted.
Which I think we already touched on.
Paying taxes, permitted, locally looked after. Make sure the septic's adequate. Okay.
Trying to keep up with you, John.
Well, I went through and highlighted everything that was actually pertinent to what we were gonna do, so I kinda got a blue mark advantage on you.
Okay. No problem.
So if you want me to give you a date on where I'm at right now? 5/27 at 3:12?
I didn't write my dates down. I just put them.
Well, it should be on your email header, shouldn't it?
Yeah, but it's not necessarily the same time, John.
All right. Cap of short-term rentals,
Same day.
applicable lodging taxes, capacity to hold the correct number of people, capacity of the septic, qualified licensed septic engineer, property owner or manager must be available, seek the approval of adjacent property owners, a brochure stating the town's ordinances.
I'm with you now.
Okay, so now we're going to the next one. Cap on how many, septic inspection, lodging taxes, property taxes, have the procedures printed out and posted on all rentals. Here was one to actually regulate the duration of stays to be no shorter than 2 nights, which I don't, that's between you and your tenant, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, no loud noises, activity, no riding ATVs or HV on the property itself. Limit the number of homes, back to the cap issue again. Septic system, designated local property manager, adequate off-street parking. Posted information in the residence. And then there was some folks that went on to say that VRBOs should not be asked to inspect their septic system, fireplaces, or anything else.
Any more frequently
anything.
than is presently required.
At least 2 contact numbers.
John, just going back to that one.
Yes,
They did say that they don't believe that it should be asked, and they shouldn't be asked to inspect their septic systems, fireplaces, or property fixtures more frequently than any other residential property.
Oh,
Not
okay,
that they
well,
didn't, just wanted to clarify.
No, I think that that's proper. Let's see, okay, single family. Allowing a guest to park small RVs between the cabins was an issue, or on the property. Yes, sir. Way out in RV. Quiet hours, property managers. A yearly water evaluation, smoke alarms, owner aims it on property, limit the number of short-term rentals, back to the cap again. Okay, let's see, restricted based upon a percentage, pay proper taxes, noise, septic, proper inspections, parking, city tax permit, and then signage. And septic inspections, lodging tax, license, property manager. So as you can see, the vast majority of everybody's concerns were very consistent. You know, now the ways to get from here to there was, you know, it may be hard to find middle ground when it's, that middle ground is sitting directly over the top of an abyss, because there is some differences in the way people think it should be handled.
Tom,
Yes, sir.
one thing in, as you mentioned, a number of the letters talked about this, input from adjacent property owners or whatever. But I would note and agree with one individual who did indicate they questioned the advisability and, constitutionality of that. So I think that's something we'll need to consider on our discussion.
Yeah, maybe, and I don't know how you go through the legality. So I know you mentioned it last week. Is that legal? Is it,
Is
is there-
what?
Well,
asking your property owner, adjacent property owners for permission?
Yeah.
And I don't know.
Well,
I mean, it's- I
actually,
think-
according to the realtor information that was supplied to us, there are cities such as the California city, a small one of them, they actually have set, I read several instances where they've set a distance of approval from 100 to 300 feet in several different towns in that realtor thing.
Well,
So how can the constitutionality be questioned
well, I
when
think
it's already being
you could
implemented?
require notification and give people the opportunity to have input, but I don't believe that the town can extend its legislative authority to neighbors. They have to set up a zoning process, an approval review process, and adjacent property owners, you can require they be notified that a permit has been applied for, so they're aware of it, can contact, play the political process however they want.
So you say it
But
was
you can't say that if 75% or 50% or 90% of the adjacent property owners approve, that would mean that the license is automatically approved. Now, if it's done through zoning, it's going to be done as a conditional use based upon this recommendation from the zoning board. And a conditional use has to be reviewed and approved by a vote of the town council. So in other words, I don't think that you can, well, it's not constitutional to say that one or two people next door can veto an application. However, Colorado state law provides that if 20% or more of the property owners adjacent or within 100 feet of the boundaries of the subject property file a protest, it requires a supermajority or two-third vote of the town council. So we can write that into the regulation or just count on that. But that's if you do it as a conditional use through zoning. If we do an administrative process, then that doesn't really come to bear because that issue gets solved through the zoning. So,
That's good to know.
Okay, anybody else? Was there anything in here that you saw that we needed to add? Anything that we need to have as a sidebar so that we take it up later? Like with, what was it? It was the trash. It was.
Yeah.
Trash was, then, the water use meter, we talked about a little bit, and then the insurance, we talked about the insurance a little bit, but that was it.
Okay.
Did we have anything in there? I know it's been brought up about quiet hours or insurance.
There was a number of that, of,
Excuse me, there were quite a few people that said the same rules that apply to the residents should apply to the short-term
Yeah,
rentals. And I think that's very important, because I don't think it's advisable to have all these special rules for people that are living in someone's home on a rental basis versus versus someone who lives there full-time.
yeah. There are a number of town ordinances that we're all aware haven't been enforced very well, and that's something the town council's been talking about. But I don't think it's necessary in the guidelines that we're going to recommend to the town council that we need to repeat all of those. I think in our discussion, if we feel that, if we see there's a weakness in a particular, ordinance that the town has, that we suggest you might want to, consider. And quite frankly, some of the comments in those letters sort of suggested, hey, look, let's have some enforcement. Perhaps that's something that ought to be passed on to the town council that, and I think, but now, by the same token, I want to say that, and I read an article today about this issue that really made me realize that around the country there's a wave of movement towards short-term rentals. It's a big deal, and there's potential for a great deal of it to occur. And we know that there's a great deal of concern in this community. There's a split about who, So if there are key issues that we feel need special attention, the town can write into its licensing guidelines supplements to the existing town code. We can make it more strict for these short-term rentals if we feel it's appropriate. And I think in some cases that may be. Just as an example, trash. Where is the person leaving the short-term rental going to put his trash? And if they're leaving on Wednesday, they've been here since the previous Friday, what's going to become of that trash? Okay, so that brings up, you talk about bear-proof receptacles. Now I'm suggesting that it's possible to include that as a special condition above and beyond what applies to other residences. So I don't think we can discount that there's an opportunity to do that.
Okay. But would we not be addressing that more when we get into the details?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
In the weeds.
Yeah.
But I just want to make that point that we can, supplement the existing code.
As a condition shows itself, if we feel that there needs to be a recommendation to modify this or that, I think we have the liberty to do that.
Yeah.
And then I think we give it back to zoning and let them bear the brunt of it.
Yeah. Well, in fact, when you go to the town council on June 9th, I think it'd be interesting to find out if they anticipate this committee's recommendation going to them or to them through the Board of Zoning Adjustment. Because
I
that could
understood that we
streamline the
hand off to
process.
them and then they hand
Yeah.
off back to zoning.
Well, I think we ought to find out because that could speed the process up because I think there's a great deal of interest in.
Okay.
Excuse me, one of the common threads that I saw in a lot of those emails was that there are a lot of people in this community that appear to rely on short-term rentals for their own family needs. They may own a particular cabin or whatever, but they rely on being able to rent other properties to bring in their entire family for particular pieces of time or whatever. So I was surprised how many people need or request the use of short-term rentals just for their own family needs. So it's not, in some ways, there's a lot of this activity that goes on that basically is an extension of the people that already live here. And I found that interesting because I didn't expect to see that.
Actually, they've been doing it all along.
Well, sure. It's been ongoing for, as someone said, 137 years or whatever it was.
Yeah, I saw that letter too.
I think the most frequent comments made through the letters had to do with the issue of compliance with the sales tax and lodging tax criteria, whatever they may be. There was a great deal of interest in residential input in the process. Clearly the septic things were important, and then this issue of how many to be allowed. I think those are things we want to be sure to address.
Well, I think that by proper inspections of septic engineer and/or fire codes, that will give us real numbers to work with. And I think that we leave that call to those people who have that expertise based upon fire capacity and based upon septic system capacity, and will respect their numbers or recommend that the town respect their numbers.
But that's for how many per dwelling, right? Is that what you're?
Yeah.
But the bigger issue appears to be how many properties are available for short-term rental, right?
Yeah.
Properties in general. And interestingly enough, there's a multitude of different ways of measuring that. Up to and including anybody that has a property should be able to rent it. That's kind of the one extreme, and then there's all kinds of other methodologies of percentage or number of rentals per season and all those kinds of things. But
Or geographic distribution.
right, geographic distribution or whatever. But there's a lot of variability in that particular subject.
Yeah,
And like you say, it was from one end of the scope to the other. It was-
Sure.
a lot of the comments from people with differing views on, how many and where they should be allowed addressed, I guess, the enforcement/complaint process issue, and suggested that, I guess, part of the property postings or whatever kind of summarize what people can do that are staying there, or what they need to be aware of, all the laws and everything. But I think it also spoke to there being some sort of a town procedure if you're going to file a complaint. Again, that gets back to the town council.
I believe it's
Yeah,
one of our bullet
enforcement.
points.
Yeah, number
isn't it?
5.
Number 5, enforcement.
Enforcement.
Yeah.
And I'm curious whether, I think this is one of those things and I'm just thinking out loud, we recommend to the town council to revisit the nuisance ordinance and nuisance officer. Because the nuisance officer states in here, they also talk about designating an agent of the mayor, but to assist the mayor in investigating and ascertaining whether a nuisance exists and assist the mayor in undertaking abatement of such nuisance. So
Well,
it appears
now-
that there's already somewhat of a process, but it could probably be a little more
Okay.
obvious, a little more clarified.
I think that typically a nuisance situation is more of a physical condition. I think we're talking about noise.
But would noise not be a nuisance?
Well, it is, but I think there's actually a different town noise ordinance, in fact. But nuisances typically reply to
I haven't been able to find a
physical.
noise ordinance, so.
Hmm? Is there?
I'm thinking it's in that same one.
Okay. Well,
But
Well, I
anyways,
just think,
that's neither
we
here nor
just
there.
recommend for the zoning board and board to revisit the ones that we think have some issues we don't clearly address. Okay, so is anything else with regard to the bullet points, with regard to public comment, public input?
I think our draft up here pretty much mimicked all the letters. And
Yeah.
like you said, we got some that we're just against, but then there's some that we're not really for short-term rentals because of these reasons.
Yeah.
But I think you can alleviate them with stuff that's on the board.
Sure.
And there were some that wanted to do whatever they wanted to do.
Mhm.
Yeah. It was kind of interesting because I got that we had 43 emails and one was hand-delivered. And you could definitely tell that they were written by 43 different personalities plus one that was hand-delivered. So everybody has got their own thoughts on things. So at this point, what I would like to do is it's time to start pecking away maybe on a little detail. So rather than grabbing something huge like administration or grabbing something huge like permitting and licenses, let's start and see how we do together by working on a one that should not be quite so difficult and not so have any degree of emotion. And let's talk about the wherever parking is going to fall. That should be an easy one for us to get our feet wet and see how we can proceed before we move into the heavier duty items.
well, it's under the administrative the content, but it's an issue that needs to, the regulation has to, I think that the licensing criteria would address that this is a standard of parking that's expected of a short-term rental. And what is that?
So
And
let's go ahead.
Cool question though,
Yes,
and I
sir.
just don't know. What are the existing ordinance or regulations on parking?
That's what I was
for-
trying to find out.
For the people that already live
You
here.
can't camp on
you
that.
can't camp on town street.
Well, and
That's
that's
really
not
not
parking. But as far as, for example, we own the depot. And it's
Right.
like, I should be, from my perspective, I should be able to park any land, anything on that land that I want to park. Now, I
I
understand
think
that
that's fine.
I don't think that-
excuse me, junk mobile homes and things like that would raise some concern from my neighbors, but at the same time, I just parked a 4-spot snowmobile trailer in there, and I don't think anybody has any right to say that it shouldn't be there. Now,
Well, the zoning regulation has some off-street parking criteria in it. And I guess I would say this is one issue, parking, where if the committee is so inclined, it could be more restrictive than, you know, what is in the zoning regulation. Give me a,
Pages of zoning, I can't remember.
yeah.
On,
Well,
as to personal property on personal property.
right.
I mean, I.
Parking, yeah, there's definitions, you know, for parking off-street, any parking area located, okay, now this is parking off-street. Any parking area located wholly within the limits of one or more lots, in other words, on the property. So, and that's really the crux of the issue, I think, is people bring in their toy haulers and RVs and everything. At a short-term rental, a transient person coming through this community, is there going to be a requirement that they have to park their equipment and vehicles off-street? In other words, on the rental property. You know, I think that you find if you go to a condominium area or something, they're given a parking permit, you got to park on their parking lot. That's off-street, so that's kind of the issue.
What are the existing rules though? I mean,
Well,
so if you own a toy hauler or whatever, you can't park it on the street. Is that under the existing rules?
Well, don't think I can speak to that as far as it relates to the town regulations. They say you can't camp on the street, and I don't think they have an ordinance that prohibits parking, like if I want to put my snowmobile trailer in the public right of way, I could. But I think the issue becomes, you know,
much more larger problem when there's
Yeah.
a lot of short-term rentals.
Sure.
so, I mean, and I think that's a perception of some, that we're gonna have all these people coming in, they're gonna be, you know, bringing their trailer and their gooseneck and everything. So the issue is, do we want to require, I mean, it'd be very simple to say, all tenants of the short-term rental shall park all of their vehicles, trailers, etc., on the short-term rental property, off-street. Simple as that.
And, excuse me, Brad?
Yeah, I think that when appropriate, I'd like to make a comment.
Okay, I think now would be appropriate.
Okay. With regard to the zoning, since 2012, we've really required all new construction to have the capability of off-street parking. We also have defined a couple definitions about parking. But it is not banned, but I think we need to make some considerations. We have streets of various widths, and we have some alleys, and that are the only access into the property. And the reason you have parking restrictions is so you can get a fire truck, generally, into a fire, or you have restrictions so that you can plow snow. Those are the two main requirements zoning-wise for parking. We've had situations in the winter when I couldn't hardly get down River Street down to my employee's house due to all the trailers parked in the street. And I think if you were to say, is this a problem up on Main Street? Probably not, because that's our widest street, 80 feet. It's paved clear across, and it's also located where it's flat. But State Street is not that way. And and River Street is not, and all the numbered streets are narrow. And the alleys are even more narrow. So, depending on where this short-term rental is at, the parking probably needs to be, at least for the trailers, on the property and not on the street. That's just my opinion.
Yes, sir.
But those are some of the criteria when you look at parking that you need to consider. And I'm done.
Yeah, well, and I can see that too, because alleys, there are homes whose only method of access is to drive up an alley. And that alley is just 15 feet wide. And, there's also supposed to be a 5-foot setback on the fences, but it depends on the age of the fence. A lot of the fences are right up to the alley where they got 15 feet. So that would certainly be something to consider depending upon the address. Okay.
Well,
Okay.
so,
But I'm sorry, but before we make any new rules, I really would like to understand what the existing requirements are.
well, I think what Brad said is that all new
For
construction.
new construction, right.
Yeah.
But what about older, is there anything that applies?
Only older property is grandfathered. In other words, if you got a ditch in
Yeah.
front of your house, you don't have to have put in a culvert to gain parking on your property. But if you did any new construction or modification, we'd require you to put in a culvert.
So I think the answer to your question is,
As to what can be parked on the streets or what cannot be parked on the street.
Okay.
so it's really simply a matter of if we feel that for short-term rentals, regardless of what the other criteria are, if we feel because of the nature of what they may bring with them, that should be required to be parked off-street, we just say it in the guideline. And if we don't say that. I mean, I think that for the reasons that Brad summarized, you would require that all vehicles and trailers be parked off-street,
Right.
period.
Right. From the fire consideration alone.
Well, I think so.
Yeah,
So, I mean, John wanted us to make a simple decision on a simple
Silly
topic.
me thinking this was an easy topic.
Well,
It's
so,
pretty
so
straightforward.
I'll make a motion that in the guidelines that we're working on, that as it relates to parking, the requirement is that the tenants of short-term rentals be required to park all vehicles and trailers, recreational vehicles, etc., off-street.
On the subject property?
Well, off-street, that's on the subject property.
Now, what happens if you've got the ditch and no culvert, if it's an open
Well,
lot?
then you may not be able to meet the criteria to have a short-term
Oh,
rental.
okay.
Okay, so there is a motion on the floor from Pete that we limit parking of vehicles, toys, and et cetera to the subject property.
Just a question
Okay.
before we do that. But there's no limit, say you have a large property, a lot of space.
Yeah.
There's no limit to the number, I mean, if you want to crowd 10
Well,
trailers in there, that's.
I mean,
acceptable?
you're renting a property out and, probably your capacity is gonna be limited,
But
so.
you're limiting factor,
But what
okay.
we're saying, yeah, if you have, 3 couples rent a house and come in, evidently they must, they probably bring 3 trailers. And
Right.
you better hope there's room, I mean, I think
But
that's,
that would be the requirement, that
Yeah.
you would have room for,
Yeah.
okay.
I second the motion.
Okay, so there is a motion on the floor by Pete, seconded by Gwen.
What was,
That-
can you repeat the motion?
When I get to it, we'll get to that. That we restrict parking for short-term rentals to the subject property. Is that
no,
not
just say off-street.
off-street
Yeah, I was gonna
property?
say,
Okay, off-street.
because
Well, I don't
there's
want it in my,
Well,
if it
subject
can't be on your
property.
place, I don't want it on mine.
Well, I know, but there's options like, and I'll bring up the one that's in everybody's mind, the garrisons. If there's parking issues, if that becomes an issue, there's parking at the Silver Plume. And that's what, if we've had to do that before to ensure that there's not parking. I mean, there's other options. I'm not saying, make sure it's just off the street, go park at your neighbors, but if we're going to make a motion, I don't think you should just say it's limited to this property and that's only where you can park it.
Okay, you want to?
Well,
I don't know how you reword it. I know I
Restate your
understand what you're
motion.
saying.
Well, off-street.
He's not saying the street the house
You know,
is on.
now, if in the end, this regulation, these guidelines end up being in the zoning ordinance, off-street is defined as on the property. So if we just simply state in our guidelines that tenant parking of short-term rentals shall be off-street. That's all
Did
you
you
have
get
to
that,
say.
Yeah, do
Susie?
you want me to read what I
Yeah,
wrote?
would you read that back and then let's verify?
Pete Olson
Eddie,
made-
we're not there yet. We'll be there in a minute.
Pete Olson made a motion that tenants of short-term rentals be required to park all of their cars and equipment off-street.
Did you?
Well, that's, I mean, that's, yeah. I mean, only,
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, you know, the simplest way to put it is tenant parking shall be off-street, including all vehicles, trailers, off-highway vehicles, snow, et cetera.
Okay, read it one more time.
Tenants of short-term rentals will be required to park all their cars and equipment off-street.
Okay.
Now,
That's your
that-
motion. Is that your second? You seconded that? Okay, so we have
I'm sorry,
discussed it. We're not
well,
done yet.
just one more.
Okay.
But if they can make arrangements, if they have enough where they can put it somewhere, like,
Well, yeah, as long as it's off-street, I mean.
okay, as long
yeah.
as it's off-street, okay.
So,
Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
that's the
But it's
issue.
not restricted to the rental
Well,
property. That's the.
No, it's not, it's just that,
Right. That, and I think that needs to be clear, because the way it's stated now, it says, unless you can park it on the rental property, then it's not acceptable. If you indeed can find other arrangements,
Well,
to park it at the Silver Plume, then.
and, you know, I think this is gonna be kind of a self-regulating thing, because if I'm renting out a unit for short-term rental, and the requirement is that people that come here have to park everything off-street, I probably ought to have room on my property or something to give them. Here, go show this to so-and-so, he'll show you where you can park your trailer.
Right.
Someplace else, like at the Silver Plume or whatever.
It'll be self-regulating.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're okay
Here's
with
a
it.
legal issue.
John,
Yes.
you might want to consider, you need to add, town also owns some vacant property, so you might want to say off-street and not on town-owned property.
I mean, where a road is platted but doesn't exist?
Well, yeah, you know, where any road is platted is a street. Period. I don't care if there's a street there or not. If it's been platted, it's a street. That's how zoning interprets it.
Yeah, but I would suggest, look, off-street's off-street.
Yeah.
So,
Right, but the town owns some property of its own.
well, then I would
And
suggest,
I don't want it to become a parking lot.
well, then I think the town better put in place some
Do not-
method to regulate that. I mean, I think
Okay,
maybe that's a footnote to the town council. Hey, here's an issue. I mean, maybe we want to
Okay.
make note of that.
Well, we have a motion, and the motion is, Susie?
Tenants of short-term rentals will be required to park all their cars and equipment off-street.
Okay,
Does
that was
that
seconded by
cover it?
Glenn. Are we ready for a vote? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, motion carried.
Now, point of clarification.
Yes, sir.
This motion is kind of our general thought. Now, I think that when we get to actually writing the regulation, it's probably not necessarily going to read exactly like that motion.
Right.
It's going to try to be a little bit more,
Well, I think it's
Clear.
kind of obvious already. There's a lot of hands up. This is going to probably have some input, may have some valid changes to it. So we just need to get a draft down of these kind of things, so, and then go from there.
Okay. So that was an easy one.
No, that one
Now,
ain't
what's the
great.
next easy one?
I'll tell you what, just for the heck of it, I'm going to give the floor an opportunity to make some comments here real quick. Yes, Eddie?
Okay, so what I understand on this parking issue is you're saying Main Street is mostly commercial, right?
it's all zoned
It's all zone
business, yeah.
business.
Okay, so if there's a short-term rental on Main Street, they can't park on Main Street.
That's what we just said.
Okay, so what you're doing is you're saying that all the traffic, all the parking right now that might occur on Main Street is gonna be pushed into the alleys in the back, right?
No, because they can't park on the alley either. It's gotta be
No,
off
I'm
street.
saying the traffic. So to get in and out of a short-term rental, the people will be using the alleys for access, right?
And they've gotta get off street, what we have.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So what you're doing is you're pushing the traffic into the alleys that aren't designed for the traffic.
What do you mean they're not designed?
Okay, let's just consider Main Street. Main Street's paved,
Yeah,
the alleys off of Main Street aren't paved.
right.
So what you do is you push the traffic into the places that aren't paved. So what happens is, you got more dust. If it's wet, you get more mud carried out on the main street. So what you're doing is you're pushing the traffic off of the street that's actually designed for the traffic into an alley that's not.
No.
Now, and let me finish, okay? So when you say off-street, you're talking about not in the public right-of-way. Is that correct?
Yes.
How many municipalities don't allow people to park in the right-of-way?
Well, you could park in the right of way here. I think what we're saying is we have a new use in the community, and there's concern, is expressed by a lot of comments, letters, etc. Toy haulers coming in, blocking the street. So we're simply saying, okay, let's resolve that problem or require they park them off street.
And by what, and that's my concern, by what you're saying is, you don't want them on Main Street, so you want them to access through the alleys, behind the hotel, behind other residences. And if you look at the alley right now, off of 3rd Street, the culvert is unusable, it's not working.
Well, you know,
I think there's a lot of issues that you guys don't realize. What you're doing is, you're saying, you know what, we're gonna make these regulations because we wanna restrict short-term rentals. And I don't think you guys realize
Well, I think
the impact,
wait just a
that
minute.
you're putting on other people by doing
Hang on a
this.
minute. First off, this committee is not, we're not biased on one side of this issue or the other. We are trying very hard to be fair and equal, so do not make the assumption that we're setting it up for failure, okay?
Okay,
we're trying to regulate the
you're
impact
doing
on
is-
the community.
what you're doing is you're looking at saying, you know what, we're not gonna allow parking on the right-of-ways, not even just on the street, but not even on the right-of-way. Why do we have 60-foot right-of-ways? 80-foot right-of-ways? What is that for? If
Drainage.
it's not for parking,
Originally, it's so you could turn around a team of wagons and a buckboard.
okay?
Okay, yeah.
And today-
That's the reason our streets are the width they are. State Street, I believe, is 80 feet. Main Street is 80 feet.
River Street's 80 feet. All named streets are 80, all numbered streets are 66.
But
So-
we have only one street that kind of sets in the plat, and that's Main. State Street wanders side to side in the, where it's platted. And, I got no really, not quite sure where the River Street sets in its plat. But the street itself, except for Main, is not 80 feet wide downstate or river.
You're talking about the drivable surface.
Yes, I'm talking the drivable surface.
Okay.
Right.
And
So
basically,
you got, the problem here is we got different size streets to accommodate different type of traffic. And the issue with short-term rentals is, up on Main Street, I could kind of see Eddie's argument. The problem is, if you get 15 of them in there and you got 15 trailers parked on the street, that tends to get to be a problem.
but you've already talked about limiting the number of short-term
But
rentals, right?
You can't say.
No, we haven't.
No,
It's been suggested that be
It's been
discussed, but
suggested,
we
that's what
haven't.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
And maybe that's part of the justification for limiting the short-term rentals is because, you know what, in Pitkin, we have limited amount of parking. I'm just concerned about when you say, you know what, we're not gonna allow any parking for short-term rentals, the impact to some of the other people I'm not sure you're considering that, okay? That's all I'm saying is please consider, before you say, you know what, absolutely no short-term rental parking on street right-of-ways, consider the impact to the residents.
Okay, well, do
Okay.
keep in mind also that we're gonna make a recommendation to the board, who's gonna flip it to the zoning board, who's gonna flip it back to the board. So everything we do is gonna be scrutinized 2 more times
Right.
before it gets there.
Right. And I realize you guys haven't even actually voted on this yet, and I appreciate being able to provide some input.
Okay,
Okay.
all right, thank you. Yeah, well, yes, ma'am.
We actually did pass the motion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
just a moment, Ramon. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Lynn Pope, Pitkin Hotel. Have a couple comments or questions. When people put in their septic tanks, for example, I assume they're inspected every year or every other year, whatever, and they're supposed to be for the size of the building or the house that's made. So what is the difference if the person that owns it is using that facility and according to the laws of Pitkin for the
Okay,
parking,
excuse me just a moment.
the parking, the septic, the water, all of that, if they're using it, what's the difference with them using it and someone coming to visit?
Oh, actually, I don't know that, but we're not gonna talk about septics tonight.
Well,
I
I'm
mean,
just
that
talking
is
about
something-
some of the general stuff. It's redundant. If you already have ordinances or laws for the town, then the people that come visit, the people that own it and let them come visit should follow those same rules.
We said the same thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean,
And that's.
And that's why some of this seems so redundant, though, that you're
Well-
rehashing a lot of it, that why make it so hard on visitors when, I mean, it should be
But we're
the
not
same as
making
the
it hard on the
people.
visitors. What
Well,
I think
mean,
we're
you're
trying to do,
more
we're trying to
stringent.
establish some guidelines. I mean, people that want to start having short-term rentals are in effect going into business, all right? Like it or not, they're going into commercial venture because they're getting this for that.
But it's still their property.
I understand that,
And
but-
the same rules would
but-
apply to them and
well-
their visitors.
No, not really.
It should, yes, it should.
No, not really.
If you write it, if you're gonna have a permit application, then part of that would be whatever laws apply to that person should apply to the visitors. And they
They-
should enforce
At
that.
a minimum, they should, but I think that because it's a new use coming into the community, the unknown
not new.
impact,
Well,
okay, well, legally it will be a new use. I think that the town has the right and the ability to require special conditions beyond that which is applicable to a regular resident.
But why?
Well, to protect the public health,
But the
safety, and welfare of the citizens of the community.
Because it's a
It doesn't-
community,
Yeah,
more
and,
than one
yeah.
person.
but the
Okay,
property
hang on,
owner
we're
is
getting
supposed
a little out of
to
order here.
protect it. Well, I
Well,
thought
you
I was
do. Oh,
asking.
You have the floor,
Okay.
go ahead.
So, I mean, if that property owner follows all the rules and regulations and ordinances, then part of that application, permit, whatever, then their visitors should follow the same rules and regulations, whether it's parking right in front of their house, like they do, or right off the street, or if it's water or septic. I mean, what if everyone that owns property in Pitkin showed up and lived here year-round? What are you going to do then? Then you're going to say, oh, we're going to change the rules. Now you're here full-time. You can't use your septic as much
Ask you
or
my
whatever.
question. I
Or
don't
water.
actually think that any of us are disagreeing with what you're saying.
Okay,
So
well,
why are you coming
well, it just
after?
seems like some of this is redundant as far as insurance. Do you go next door and ask, your neighbor, do you have the proper insurance? Do you have the proper fire? Do you have, how much water are you using? How many times are you flushing your toilet? So it just seems redundant on the
Well, let me
lot
make a
of it.
point, and you probably
Okay,
will not
sorry.
agree with me. But I believe that once you begin treating your residents as a business, it falls under a different set of parameters than just simply being a residence. And you people, most of all, I would think would appreciate the fact that we are not going to permit a short-term rental to compete with you on an uneven
I'm
basis.
not worried about the competition
Well,
because
but
that's
still
a
though,
totally,
if you
but it's a
pay
totally
taxes
different
and
thing.
you take care of your business properly,
Yes,
then
and we
somebody
plan
who is
to.
competing with you and running their home as a business should also compete with your property.
But a lot of people can't stay in the hotel. Anybody that is disabled or can't walk up the stairs, they can't stay there. We know that.
Well, that's,
And
I don't want
so,
to be
I mean-
rude to you, but I don't think that we're really disagreeing with you.
I know, well, okay,
Okay,
my
so-
point was, it's just a lot of it's
Well,
redundant
but
because
that
you
would be
already
our
have
choice to
rules.
make as the committee.
Okay, anyway, my point.
All right, yes, Chris.
Hey, John, I just had a question about this parking issue. I believe the committee was commissioned to propose guidelines for management of short-term rentals. There's already an ordinance in place that addresses parking in business and residential. And I think what y'all are proposing is probably going to require a zoning change, zoning adjustment.
No, ostensibly, these criteria are going to be written into the zoning regulation.
All the guidelines that y'all are going to propose, you think are going to be written into the
Well,
zoning?
they're either going to be that or there's going to be a separate licensing ordinance if the town moves forward with this whole situation.
So the requirements for short-term rentals would be different from everybody else in town as far as parking.
That's what we just passed a motion as a committee to say that, yes.
Because currently, it's just one vehicle.
That's
that-
what, we've been
that's
trying
right.
to find out do you know what the existing
Yeah,
regulations are?
it's on page 16 of the zoning code,
Okay.
section 12, subsection G.
Well, I understand that. That's for a new construction home.
No, it says all business and resident districts. All business and resident districts.
Well, I'll have to read it.
Require area and access to park one vehicle on the property.
Okay, that's correct. I'm not arguing that.
Well-
What we're saying is that a short-term rental brings to the community potential additional impact. And as a committee, we've determined that one of the things we wanted to address was parking, ample parking, because everybody knows there's going to be a lot of vehicles, a lot of trailers coming to town, and it's been a concern voiced by a lot of
That would be true
people.
for almost every summer home here, because people come and they bring their trailers, they bring their
I understand
ATVs,
that.
not necessarily a short-term rental.
And they're property owners. And they have a little bit different right than a short-term rental tenant does. And that's what, you know, I think that this community has the ability to expect a different standard, a higher standard for people that come to this community as, you know, as short-term rental tenants, because they're going to have an impact on the community that this community has not experienced in the past.
Yeah, Corey, go ahead.
First, I'm going to say maybe we revisit this. But I mean, obviously, there's some public input, and like you said, the zoning ordinance says one vehicle. Maybe when we revisit this, we say, okay, well, maybe they should consider saying adequate off-street parking for all vehicles. Because like Eddie said, if you say you have to park off-street and your only access is through the alley, look what you've done. You've caused all this traffic. But if you just say you need to have adequate off-street parking so the option is available, you know, like, and I know it's just because this is the one that's in everybody's head, the Garrison's house. Off-street parking's there and it's right off of State Street. It doesn't really affect traffic or anything on an alley, but what if it's something that is on an alley and you say, as long as the off-street parking is there, they have the choice to use it or not. But I don't know that you want somebody bringing their toy hauler down a 15-foot alley. I'm just saying I think it may be a reasonable compromise in saying that instead of saying you have to park off-street or you can, you just allow everything. I think maybe a more reasonable requirement is say you need to have adequate off-street parking for the amount of guests that are staying at your property.
Or, I'm of the opinion that the less new regulation you have, the better. And whatever applies for the current situation, for the current owner should apply for the short-term renters. And if people can park their own stuff off on public land right now, then why can't the short-term renter?
Any other?
I mean-
Going off kind of what you said, one of the other things we're going to consider is a cap. Well, that kind of eliminates this whole, there's going to be every house along State Street rented out and there's going to be toy haulers everywhere. If you have a cap and it's whatever, say 10 houses, well, you're not going to have this massive
That's true.
And so I think we can revisit. I just think maybe we're getting a little too specific, and there's some unintended consequences.
Well, you know, our
this
heart was in
recommendation.
the right place.
Oh, I know,
Because
I know.
we took all these letters, and that was a very consistent concern from most of the people who give input. So, you know, the point of, I mean, we are actually trying to be very fair and consider everybody's thoughts. And now when we do so, the very first instance of doing so, we're under a tremendous amount of fire. Okay?
I wouldn't say we're under.
Well,
but
but
I think there's some
not
things that
fire,
we did not
but-
see
Yeah,
already.
there's just some things we need to
Yeah.
consider.
I just wanted you to consider the whole picture.
I'd like to add a comment here.
Yes, sir.
I don't think you can cap short-term rentals in commercial zoning. I don't think you can require neighbor approval in commercial zoning.
I would agree with
I
that.
don't think we can either.
So to say that I'm only gonna have X number of short-term rentals in commercial zoning is not a fact, because I don't think you can limit it in commercial.
Now, this brings up, in my opinion, another avenue for the licensing of these short-term rentals, and that would be by separate ordinance. And then in that separate ordinance, there could be a cap placed in that, but certainly not through the zoning, because the zoning says they're permitted
In commercial.
in the business district. But if you were to write a separate administrative regulation or ordinance that had these criteria we're going to develop, in that separate ordinance, separate from the zoning, one of the additional criteria that would be put on the list would be that the subject property complies with zoning. Okay? And that's how you could make it an administrative approval. But
Yes, sir.
if, otherwise we can't, and then you could put in that administrative regulation that's separate from zoning, you could put a cap if you wanted.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Ryan Pope, their kid. Just have a couple questions, maybe. One, who is the current enforcement officer for these?
We do not have it.
Not for
Okay.
parking. For nuisance there is, but there's not one for parking.
Okay, my second question, what would be your suggestion to the council on the enforcement officer?
Well,
We
that-
really haven't gotten to that yet because we're still on item number one.
the town is in the process of addressing that whole issue. I'm not sure what the status is, but they've been discussing creation of a municipal court. Most of the town ordinances that relate with use and property and environment state that there's an enforcement process of citation could be issued and then contested in municipal court. But they've never done any of that because they haven't had a municipal court. So that, theoretically, all of the ordinances the town's adopted have an enforcement process, but in practice it hasn't been, implemented.
Okay, that leads to my third question. What would be your suggestions to help pay for?
But they're not too bad.
Listen, you are starting at the wrong place.
Okay.
This is where we are. Now, when we get to
That's the
those
future.
points where we talk about that, then you can bring it up. But if we keep bouncing around like balls, we'll never get anything done.
Okay, Ramon.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of point out something that I think will help you time-wise. It actually was discussed at the town board meeting, and it's a primary reason that it was suggested that the suggestions from this board go to the zoning board. And my suggestion is don't waste your time on a lot of specific wording. Come up with the rules, what you think is necessary for the operation, because the zoning board is the group that's familiar with the ordinance, with the language. And this is, I think, a very good example. You've heard from about 4 people now what the zoning ordinance says, and they've been very misleading, because, a couple people have quoted from section G, but they completely omit section H, which is probably just as much, as not more applicable.
Read it to us, please.
All construction in business districts shall have an ample parking area on the building property lot and shall not solely rely on town streets. Now, this is
it starts off with all construction. It was specifically designed for building. This, contrary to what's been said, this is a new use that you're talking about. If not, if for no other reason, just in scale, it's totally new to this town. And you can read through the zoning ordinance.
What's new?
Many,
What are you referring to?
would you let me finish,
What is
please?
new? Can you clarify what you're talking about? What is new?
Candy,
So we'll understand.
Candy, let's let him finish, please.
What is new is what's been referred to as VRBOs, but short-term rentals of residential property. It's been extremely limited. I've been here 37 years, and I'm listening to people who've been here less than 2 months tell me that this has been going on for 100 years. Well, it hasn't been. And it certainly hasn't been as a business, a commercial operation, and at the scale that we're looking at today. And so this is the problem that exists, and why this committee was formed, is the existing zoning ordinance doesn't address this type of detail. And
So I think that we just all need to keep in mind that we are just the very first step in a very difficult process that goes much deeper and further than us.
yeah,
So if
well,
there-
that's what I'm trying to say,
Yeah.
John, is it's the concepts that, what type of rules are required? To spend your time a half hour or an hour talking about, well, how should we specifically limit the parking? I think you've got better things to spend your time on.
Well, I think we do
and
too.
leave the specifics of that to work out the language on what you decide should be the rules to go by.
Well, I just think that any time that we have an ordinance, some type of existing rule, that we would make a note that perhaps the zoning board or the town board should revisit that and take a look at it, because that's beyond the scope of what we're trying to do here. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I have an idea. Cut to the chase. Any short-term rental that has been in existence prior to 2012 should just be grandfathered in, just like the Moon Reed's waste disposal system.
Okay, let's not get personal or we're done.
Yeah, let's, I hate to cut people off.
Yes, Thomas.
Go ahead.
Just briefly, I'd like to thank the group because you're tasked with quite a challenge. And in terms of the 5 bullet points, they're pretty comprehensive. I can see where they would be consistent with the rest of the state and the rest of the country for sure. I think to dovetail in on what a few people have said, including Ramon, in terms of just if we stay in the weeds, it'll be a long process. We can't afford to be in the weeds on too many of them. But my suggestion would be for many of those, because they should all be touched on in committee. That's why they're up there. But my approach would be to take each one and then say nuisance. And I might be wrong here, but maybe I'm picking an easy when I'm trying to pick an easy.
That's what I
example.
thought I was doing.
Take something like nuisance, and we would all want a process in place, even though we know we don't have law enforcement here. But all of us want a process in place, a complaint system that's fairly expeditious to a remedy, whether the complaint is a popular one, which would be noise late at night. We need that in place, even if the town has no rentals or commercial property, we still need that in place. An expeditious complaint system. Trash is another example. Trash is handled in the ordinance, and I realize that we're looking at a different animal here with a short-term rental versus a residential house, but that's also handled. So I'll just wrap up by saying that my approach would be to pick each one of these and decide how many are clearly addressed in the existing ordinances, and only touch on the few, and I think there might be a very small number, probably less than 5, that should be addressed further.
Okay.
And that might speed things up too.
Okay. Anyone else? Candy, did you want to finish what I asked you?
Well,
to do?
when y'all were talking about trash earlier and parking, I mean, we already have ordinances. most people with the rentals, and trash is really off subject here, but the people that do rentals now, the trash is left in the homes. When the people leave, it's all gathered up and it's disposed of by the management people. Whoever's cleaning the property, or it's not left out on the streets, they're not to put it out there. So I think that's kind of a moot point.
Yeah, I would agree that that would be the responsibility of the landlord.
That could be part of the property postings.
Yeah.
You'll leave your trash inside.
Okay. All right, so do you folks have anything left? Do we want to?
Can I just say one thing that I guess my assumption is we're going to try to work this draft out, and then at some point we'll make motions on the finalized version that we present to the board,
Yes.
zoning board. Okay.
And it will be a line item.
Okay. Because obviously, this is, an easy one, and it already, in my mind.
Well, yeah.
You know, I'd just like to make one point.
Yes, Glenn.
Because I keep hearing all of this about grandfathering in and everything. I bought my house in 2005. I did not come up here till 2007. And I was specifically told by the town that I could not do short-term rentals. Just to let you know, not everybody does it.
Okay. Yeah, Pete.
Well,
I think that we're going to wind down here real quick.
well, I don't know if you want to talk about this grandfather issue some before we quit, or
I think that's a big animal to
Yeah.
talk about.
Yeah,
Well,
too long.
okay.
Just to let everybody know.
Yeah. Well,
Essentially,
that,
do you want to talk about it?
I'll tell you what, for the sake of time in this meeting, let's see, do we really want to tackle that? That's something that could take some time. I mean, you got just brief comments? Or
Well,
Excuse me, I just have a question. Why are we even addressing that?
Well,
That's not part of our scope.
These are the comments.
Well, sure, they're comments, but it's
Well,
not part of our
fine.
scope,
Okay.
right? Of the committee.
Well, a lot of this is not part of our.
Yeah, actually, what we are to do, we are not to determine whether they are legal or illegal or
If
this
they're
or that.
grandfathered or not.
That's not our choice. Our choice is going to be that if, right now, these are the recommendations that we believe as a committee should go forward and be presented to the board and to the zoning board with regard to the town's proper management of short-term rentals.
Right.
And I think that beyond that, we probably ought not go there. If it's not a requirement or a function or a intended result of this committee, then I think that we should not do that.
I agree.
Okay? So if nobody's got anything else, so if somebody wanted to call a meeting, we could do that. Yes,
Well,
Susie?
Well, I think that what I've understood is that things that weren't legal can't be grandfathered in. That's all I want to say. That's just it,
It's
you know?
interpretation.
I'm going to say grandfathering is not, we shouldn't even be discussing this, because there's rules in for grandfathering that's not for us to determine. I don't think that's part of our scope here, period. I guess if we're wanting to move on, can we, you want to announce next meeting so we know?
Yeah, the next meeting
Monday?
is going to be this Monday at 7 o'clock.
Can we set our agenda and say we're going to talk about these specific topics?
I think we could do that,
Because we
if
kind
you
of
want
keep
to.
getting off in the weeds and
Well,
we don't know where we're going from here.
And I would suggest too that, on this agenda for tonight's meeting, we have work session listed, and we had several points to address. And I think that at the next meeting, we need to have a work session, and when we're done with our work session, then have a final public comment, because this interplay on each point, we're just gonna drag it out forever.
I agree.
Because,
I agree.
there's, kind of herd and cats.
And excuse me, I still personally believe that the most productive way to use our time is for us to meet and develop a draft and then get the public comment. Because if we keep doing this,
Right.
it's just, in a 2-hour meeting, we've spent 35, 45 minutes in the weeds the whole time when we're not really on topic. And it would be so much more beneficial to have the committee work for an hour and 15 minutes, then post what we've done and get public comment. But this back and forth stuff is just not productive.
Okay, I don't know if we can actually legally.
Yeah, that's
Well,
why I
no, we
was
can-
curious about that.
We can have a work session here, and essentially, we just need to ignore all those people, but they have the right to be here.
Okay, fair enough.
So,
But
but we need to just stay on point and have our discussion, spend an hour and a half doing it.
And then take public.
I
There
think
we
the
go.
agenda we had tonight is good. At the beginning, we give an opportunity for public comment. We review, we agree on the agenda, and we have our work session. And,
Okay,
you know,
I'm with
we
you.
just need to put blinders on, really.
Okay.
And we're gonna get faces made at us, and, you know, but John asked you to take notes, and then at the end, we'll hear your comments, and we'll take them under advisement.
Bingo.
I think that's
So,
because,
so what you're suggesting is perhaps at the next meeting, we could talk about number 2. I think that safety would be, and I think there's going to be a lot of common ground on that, but who knows?
well, I mean, yeah, I think you're right, yeah, I think that's fine. I think we ought to take a couple of those. I mean,
Yeah,
we need to move along.
Can we focus more on the bullet points, I think, and hammer out, you know, like kind of the comments said, let's not get too specific on wording and everything. Let's say, okay, next meeting we're going to hit 2 and 3 and get the kind of common
Yeah, the general
idea down,
consensus
but
of what the
not,
idea is. Then we
this is what it's going to say
and then we
exactly.
can
I
go
thought
into-
that's what we decided at the beginning of this.
Well, and you folks are gonna have to help us a little bit, okay? Go on ahead, Rachel, you've been wanting to talk for a long time, so.
Just a question. I think, from what I observed happened is that nothing was too bad until a motion was made and accepted like that. And I think my question is, what weight does a motion carry? And if you're making a motion before we've had a time to ask our questions, I think that's what got people nervous.
Well,
That the motion was
you know,
carried.
I think,
Well,
What's
but
the
the
weight of a
public is
motion?
actually not part of the discussion process.
Okay.
I mean, you got a motion, you got a second, you got discussion, you got a vote, and I'm sorry, but you guys don't get to vote.
I think what the concern was is in the process of you firsting and seconding a motion, the concern was that maybe there was a lack of information about what the ordinances had already said about parking, and people were getting nervous because we got the idea that you weren't informed about the ordinance.
Okay, well, and I see your point, but this is the point, okay? It's gonna leave us and go to zoning. It's gonna leave zoning and go back to the board. So what we present, by the time it's an end deal, there might not even be one word in there he and I said. It could be totally different. So rather than to dwell on it, if it's an ordinance, we'll acknowledge that it's an ordinance, and we're gonna put a footnote on it that the board should revisit this when it gets in their court and not in ours. Okay, is that satisfactory? So think about that as you formulate your questions. Okay, if it's something that is already in code, then it's up to the zoning board or it's up to the town board to apply those or revisit them as they see necessary.
I also think that, you know, it's sort of inappropriate and out of line to get personal with our commentary and our discussion. And this issue keeps being brought up about the clout of people that are here 37 years versus somebody here 5 years versus someone here a couple of months. And I'm getting the distinct impression, because I've only been here a couple of months, that somehow I'm not a resident that's allowed to have a voice.
All right, well, you are allowed to have a voice, and we read it, we studied it, and yeah, I don't think we need to go any deeper into that. I don't mean that out of disrespect, but it's just, we need to move on.
Yeah, I just want to know if I'm allowed to speak.
well, I think.
Well, you always
Because I
have
am
been.
a
Have I
resident.
ever denied you your ability to
No,
speak?
you haven't, but
Okay.
there seems to be some people here that resent my very existence in this town because I have not bought property yet. I guess I'll have
Okay.
to solidify my right to speak by buying a piece
Well-
of property in Pitkin.
That is not true, because I have recognized you every time you've asked to be
You
recognized.
have, and I
Okay,
appreciate
so
that.
let's not go there any further. Does anybody have,
I just would reiterate that we've agreed at the next meeting, we're gonna talk about what, items 2 and 3, or?
I don't know, I think we could determine that, but we need to nail down some
Yeah.
things.
well,
Talk
just,
about them specifically.
And I think then I would also suggest that we stick with an agenda that consists, like I said earlier, a work session, blinders, and those people need to be respectful of that. And at the end, they'll have an opportunity, you know, and I think, you know, going into it too, but, you know, most of the comments we're getting are being repetitive,
If they are.
And perhaps the chair would want to exercise his discretion to say,
And
well,
just-
we've heard that before.
Just to ease what they were saying, that's why I was asking earlier, if, once we've hammered all these details out, will we make a motion before we send it to, this is what we're sending to
Yeah,
them?
when,
And I think then, at that point, then we can take in account some of the, with the parking, some of the unintended consequences of, okay, well,
Yeah.
we had this idea, there were some issues brought up with it, we're gonna change it slightly to address that, and that's what we're sending to the zoning board. And I think, so, it's not that we're gonna make a motion and that's what's going on, I think we make a motion, public comments, we take in consideration what was unforeseen.
if we're gonna have a line item approval, then we cannot have line item public comment.
No, exactly. We've got to get some things, we've had a great deal of public comment, we solicited, gave people, we need to get on down the road.
And also, when it comes time for detail, we'll go back through these letters again and get some of their input from detail. So I think that you folks have had a fair opportunity to be heard. I know that we've all read your things. I've had more 35-page documents handed to me in the last week than I care to actually talk about, but I've read them all. And, so we do need to make better use of our time. I work, a number of these guys work, and so, I want to have a life in addition to this. So, yes, ma'am, and this is going to be the last question.
All right, talking about a better use of time, just to save a little bit, a suggestion would be to get the minutes beforehand, so you don't spend 15
They
minutes
had
reading
the
them.
minutes beforehand.
Okay,
We did.
so
You
we'll-
still have to read them publicly.
Well, you don't have to, you can, I think we can.
They don't usually.
We have the advance, we can go ahead.
Yeah, you just make your recommended changes, so, and that's
So
probably a good
if,
point, John.
I'll tell you what, I agree with that, believe me.
Just do it like
As much
town
as I
council
was,
does.
I'm still.
Yeah, I'm all for that.
I'm all for it.
All the
So I will send them to
corporations
you
I-
as soon as I get them. You guys review them, and then, now, do you not have a printer, or do you just chose not to print them? or-
I read them all, and then I have them electronically, and that's the way I prefer to keep them.
All right,
But I certainly read them all.
okay.
One other note, suggestion, and it's completely up to this committee, but if we can get that projector to work and we can get a laptop hooked up to it, and we can project up on the screen, then we can basically develop these things on the fly. And then people can see exactly what we're talking about, and it saves a lot for the note takers as well. I've negotiated countless contracts that way, and everybody can see exactly what's being considered for final language. I'm just saying that if that's an option, we may
Well,
want to consider
I don't
utilizing
think
it.
that utilizing any technology to help us be more efficient and more quick would be,
Okay,
that would be very
we'll need to
positive. So-
check
Yeah,
it
I'll
out.
have to work and see.
Okay. All right. So we're going to meet meet Monday at 7 p.m. and we're going to discuss the items of items 2 and 3.
Right.
And
Those are easy.
so, yeah, really. I don't know that there is any easy ones. If somebody would like to send us home, I would sure call.
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Okay.
Sorry, Glenn, go ahead.
No, that's fine. Corey second.
Okay, Joe makes a motion, Corey seconds to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, meeting adjourned. Wait, was that an aye? Okay. 8:54? Very good. Thank you, people. Sorry this is taking so